My name is Eric, and I am the youth and worship pastor here at Living Hope Alliance Church. And I don't know if it's an oxymoron to say that I'm excited to preach to you about anger, but I am. I'm really excited for what God has for us in this message this morning. And I want to start off by asking you a question. The question is this: how many of you have ever exploded in anger for no reason whatsoever? I sure have. In fact, when I was between 10 and 11 years old, I went through a phase where me and my brother, we would explode at each other all the time. And it seemed to just come out of nowhere. There was no good reason for us to be angry at each other. It just kind of happened. And so one morning, I'm sitting on the couch in our house, and our family room area was connected to the kitchen area. So I'm over here in the family room, and my brother's over here in the kitchen. And I don't even remember why I was mad at him, but I had never been this angry before in my life. And something just switched in me. I decided this was the last straw. My brother was gonna get it. And in an instant, on the inside, I'm 4 feet tall at this time, but on the inside, I'm 9 feet tall, and I'm like the Hulk, and my shirt is ripping off at this point, and I jump up out of the couch, and I full-on sprint to my brother. Now, my brother's 6 years older than me, and bigger than me, and also smarter than me at this point. And so he sees me coming, and he just steps out of the way. And I was already in warp 5, so I ran straight into the counter and buckle over, and my brother starts laughing, and that makes me even more angry because he's not getting the point. Now, I'm not sure if some of you have had a similar experience. In fact, I had another one, and this is my favorite story. Again, no reason for me to be angry at my brother, but we're going back and forth, and he's driving me to my piano lesson. And he starts giving me little punches in the car from the driver's seat. And I think, I'm going to teach him a lesson. I actually rationalized this through in my mind. I said, if I jump out of the car while it's moving, Mom and Dad are going to hear about it, and then they'll punish Kyle. And so I told him, stop doing that, I'll jump. And he punched me again. And so, granted, we weren't going that fast. But I literally unbuckled, opened the door, and jumped out. Anger can lead us to do some pretty ridiculous things. I'm not sure if probably you haven't jumped out of a moving car, but if you can, it hurts. So don't do it. But I'm sure you can relate in some way to my stories. There's this anger within us, and sometimes it just comes out of nowhere. And this is because anger is a part of our created nature. This is something that is actually a part of who we are and who we were meant to be. In fact, I want to read to us from Nahum chapter 1, verses 2 to 8. And I just want you to listen to these words. We're not going to spend the bulk of our time here, but I find this fascinating. And this book is part of the Minor Prophets, and it's right near the end of the Old Testament. It says this, starting in verse 2, "The Lord is a jealous God, filled with vengeance and rage. He takes revenge on all who oppose him and continues to rage against his enemies. The Lord is slow to get angry, but his power is great, and he never lets the guilty go unpunished. He displays his power in the whirlwind and the storm. The billowing clouds are the dust beneath his feet. At this command, the oceans dry up and the rivers disappear. The lush pastures of Bashan and Carmel fade, and the green forests of Lebanon wither. In his presence, the mountains quake and the hills melt away. The earth trembles and its people are destroyed. Who can stand before his fierce anger? Who can survive his burning fury? His rage blazes forth like fire, and the mountains crumble to dust in his presence. God is angry. Anger is not only a part of our experience, it's actually a part of who God is and a part of who Jesus is. And I don't know about you, but you might have been confused because I'll come back here. There's a verse, it just talks about how God is jealous and filled with rage, and then he says, the Lord is slow to get angry. Sometimes this can seem like an oxymoron, and we don't know how to handle our anger. We feel like, well, we're supposed to be slow to get angry. We're supposed to push anger aside. Anger is a bad thing. Anger shouldn't be a part of our lives. But the reality is that anger is a part of our created nature, and that's not a bad thing. In fact, Jesus also gets angry during his time on earth when he was ministering. In Matthew chapter 21, verses 12 to 13, we see that Jesus enters into the temple, and he sees that there were people doing marketplace things and turning the temple into a place that it wasn't supposed to be. And so he goes and he turns the tables up on their end. Jesus was angry. He was angry at what was happening in there. Something was not right. And here's the thing. If God gets angry and Jesus gets angry, then anger is part of our created nature because we are created in the image of God. It says this in Genesis 1, verses 27. We were created after the likeness of God. So anger is an emotion that we are supposed to have. Okay, so let's establish that first. Anger is not something that we're here to just get rid of. It's a part of who we are. And if this is true, and because of this, then we come to Ephesians chapter 4, verse 25 to 27. And this is where we're going to spend the most of our time here. So if you have your brown Bibles, this is on page 897. Again, this is Ephesians chapter 4, verses 25 to 27. So, stop telling lies. Let's stop lying to ourselves, stop kidding ourselves that anger isn't a part of who we are. Stop telling lies. Let us tell our neighbors the truth, for we are all parts of the same body. And don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you are still angry, for anger gives a foothold to the devil. There's something that I have to set straight right from the beginning. Okay, we've already learned that anger is a part of our created nature. So if this is true, that also means that anger is not sin. Anger in and of itself is not a sin. And I think this is one of the biggest myths that gets us into trouble. We think that any time that we're angry, that this is a bad thing. And we read that we're supposed to manage our anger, be slow to anger. And I think that often translates for us to let's push anger down and make sure that it never comes out. Let's make sure that we're never angry because anger is sin. And this just is not true. See, in 1 Peter 2, verse 22, and Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15, it says that Jesus lived without sin. And if we've already established that he got angry during his time here, then we know that anger is not a sin, right? He turned the tables up. He was angry. He acted out in anger, but yet he lived without sin. So anger is not a sin. In fact, Paul, in this verse, tells us to be angry. And so up on the screen, you're going to see a couple of different translations. And I love doing this with a Bible passage. We read out of the New Living Translation here at the church, and this is a great translation for being easy to read and for having a lot of good translation from the Greek and Hebrew. But there's also many others, and maybe you've been a little bit confused. Why are there so many different translations? Well, there's different ways that scholars can go about translating them, and they are all valid. And when we look at them, we can sometimes gather a more complete picture of what is going on. And so here we've got the ESV. It says, "Be angry and do not sin." So it actually says, be angry. It's okay to be angry. And in the Message, I love this, the Message one is going to come up right here. Go ahead and be angry. Paul is releasing us to be angry. You actually do well to be angry. The caveat is, Paul says not to sin in our anger. Okay, so how does this happen? How can we be angry and yet not sin? The purpose of anger is to point us towards problems that need to be solved. Anger isn't the main event. Anger isn't the main problem. In fact, anger is a symptom. Anger is a symptom of something else that is going on in our life. It could be a hurt, it could be a fear, it could be a number of things that aren't the way that they ought to be. And anger is an emotional response to this condition. Anger is the result of core issues. Just in the same way that drug abuse is most often the result of core hurts and fears. The drug addiction is a problem, but it's not the problem. It's a result of something else going on in our lives. And until that core issue gets solved, that drug addiction isn't going away. Try as they may, it's going to keep coming up and manifesting itself, and it is the same way with our anger. Sometimes in our anger, we can lash out and we can do things that are not right. It wasn't right for me to charge after my brother, and it wasn't right for me to try to get him into trouble by jumping out of a car. But that wasn't the core problem. I was doing those things because of something else that led me to that place. And so me lashing out in my anger was a problem. But in order for me to be able to fix that problem, I would need to address the core issue that was lying behind it. And for me and my brother, that core issue would have been communication. We were not communicating to each other when we did things that irked us, that bothered us. And the longer we let that go and weren't being honest to each other about the things that were happening in our relationship, the more anger that stirred up in us and the more that it led us to do things that in the end were sinful. But here's the thing, focusing on the symptom doesn't fix the problem. Focusing on the anger isn't going to fix the problem. So if you feel like you're somebody who has an anger problem, you feel like you have a hot temper, you feel like anger is something that you just can't get a hold of, you can't get control of anger in your life, the more you try to just fix the anger and to push it away, maybe you're trying to stuff it down into the back of your mind, maybe you're trying every single time that anger comes up, you're just trying to take a deep breath. And while that might be a good thing to do, that anger isn't going to go away until you look for the reason that it is starting. See, I like to think of anger as a warning sign. It's a warning sign to indicate to us that there's something that we need to do. Just like in your car, you've got your check engine light. When that engine light comes on, it's a warning sign. Let's check what's going on under the hood, right? And so when we're angry, let's check what's going on beneath the surface. If we go back to our examples of when God is angry and when Jesus is angry, God was angry at the condition of his creation and his created people. He wasn't angry at us, and he didn't lash out and destroy us, but he was angry that we weren't living life the way that he intended us to live. There was something so much better, and we weren't living his way. The same thing was true of Jesus in the temple. He was angry that the church was being treated as something that it wasn't meant to be. He said it was meant to be a house of prayer, and here they had turned it into a marketplace. So those were the core issues behind the anger, and they go on to resolve that. God, through redemption and through his son, Jesus Christ, that came so that he could save us and restore us, so that eventually we could be with him again the way that it was intended to right from the beginning. And Jesus brings the church, the temple, back to a place where it was supposed to be. And this is why Paul says in that verse, and I like this one from the Message, you do well to be angry. Okay, it is good for us to be angry because it points us towards the things that we need to change in our life. Maybe this is something that is happening in your marriage, or maybe with a family member or coworker at work, and you find yourself angry at them. This is a warning sign that there is something lying beneath the surface that you need to address. Maybe they've hurt you and you haven't told them that they hurt you. Maybe you've hurt somebody else and you didn't realize that what you had done had hurt them, and they haven't told you yet, and they're holding that resentment against you. The moment that we can deal with the core issue is the moment that we can move past our anger. And this brings me to my last point. That if we choose to ignore the warning signs, if we try to stuff anger down and ignore it or put it away, that's dangerous. Suppressed anger is dangerous. This is when anger becomes something that can lead us to sin. And so often we have associated anger as something that is negative because we've never actually dealt with the core issue. We've ignored it. We've ignored the warning signs. And so then it continues to boil up in us until we lash out in sinful ways. We lash out in ways that hurt others. We lash out in ways that drag other people down. And that's not healthy. And so this is why in Ephesians 4, verse 26b to 27, the last part of verse 26, it says, don't sin by letting anger control you, and don't let the sun go down while you are still angry, for anger gives a foothold to the devil. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. Okay, this isn't saying that you need to stop being angry before the sun goes down. It's saying, pay attention to the warning sign that anger is giving you. And be honest and go deal with that core issue. If you're angry, look for what is lying behind it. And marriage is a good example of this, because in a marriage we often go to bed together, right? And if there is something that is in Danielle and my relationship that is in conflict, it's best not to stay angry at each other and to leave the issue alone, but instead it'd be a healthy thing for us to learn how to communicate about what is bothering us. And so this is what it's saying. When anger comes upon you, don't try to just push it away, because it's going to come back. Don't leave it until the next day. Deal with it here and now. Pay attention to the warning signs. See, because when we let anger build up, it gives the devil a foothold. And a foothold is a place where, almost imagine like you've got your foot in a doorway. It keeps that door from closing. It allows the enemy a place to enter in to our lives, and a place for him to drive us to do the things that we so often associate with anger. And the longer we let it build up, it builds pressure, right? It's like it steams up. Like if you shake a can of Coke, you're building up pressure, and eventually it's going to blow. You know, in our premarital counseling, they talked about anger manifesting itself in one of two ways. They called one way the hedgehog, and they called the other way the lion. Now, the hedgehog is somebody who, when they get angry, when they get in conflict, they curl up and they bottle it in, and they don't let anybody into their world. But after a long time, and this is how a hedgehog behaves, after a long time of this building up and shying away, eventually they'll open up and they'll lash out. And then all of a sudden you've got this big long laundry list of everything that has been bothering them. And the other person is like, whoa, what just happened? What went on? Where's this all coming from? That's a hedgehog. And the other one is the lion. And the lion is the person who maybe you associate with a hot temper. When they're angry, they just, poof, they're angry right now. And they deal with it. And both of these are equally damaging ways of dealing with our anger. Because we don't want to lash out ever. And both of them, you either lash out after a long time or you lash out right away. And there's somewhere in the middle that we want to be, where we can be angry, where we can go ahead and be angry and feel that emotion just as it is meant to be a part of our created nature. We can feel the anger, but we can let it lead us to a place where we deal with the issue, the core issue that was lying behind it. The longer we let anger build up, the more likely we are to sin in our anger. And that's what Paul says not to do. Don't sin in your anger. Don't sin by letting anger control you. But there's good news. Okay, you might be wondering, okay, so how do I manage my anger? How can I do what you're asking me to do, Eric? In Ephesians 4, verse 23, just a couple verses earlier, tells us that we can actually be transformed. It says, instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. See, because we have the Spirit living in us, the life of Jesus Christ is actually in us, and He, the one who lived without sin, the one who is able to be angry and yet not sin, that life is living within us. And we can be renewed to be just like Jesus when we give that invitation to the Spirit to come in and take over. He can renew our thoughts, and He can renew our attitudes and our behavior. And so it is possible. So what do we do with what we've heard? How can we take this and apply it? Well, I want to bring us back to the first verse that I read you in Ephesians 4, verse 25. We need to be honest with each other. This series is called Honest to God. When we're angry, and not only when we're angry, when we're sad, when we're fearful, when we're joyful, when we're brokenhearted, we need to be honest together. And I have a translation up there from the Message, if we can put that up. I like the way that it puts it, because it says, now here's the thing. Do away with all the false pretense, Stop lying to each other and tell each other the truth. Tell each other what's really going on, because at the end of the day, when you're not doing this, you're only lying to yourself. I think so many of us can come into this place and we feel like we need to put on a show. Christians behave a certain way, and anger is not one of them. And this is something that we need to do away with, because anger is a part of all of our story. And the longer that we try to ignore it, and the longer that we try to pretend that we can just push it away and that Christians never get angry, the more angry we become and the more hypocritical we become. I know I have so many friends who will never walk through the doors of a church because they think that we're the biggest hypocrites. They say, how can I come into a place where you say that you're not this and you're not that, and that's all I ever see? This is a safe place. We're all broken. And we all know this, and we all know that we've dealt with anger somewhere along in our journey. And so this is the best place where we can be honest with each other. And so when I'm angry, I can pray to God. I can tell God that I'm angry. He's big enough that he can handle that. And we have a shared experience in Christ and in our life journey that allows us to empathize with each other. So when you're struggling with anger or with any of the other emotions that we've talked about in this series, find somebody to talk to and be honest with them, because that is the first key to finding that core issue. Stop kidding yourselves. Stop pretending. Stop holding it in. It's exhausting. The longer you do that, the more tired you're going to get. See, I told you a couple of stories at the beginning, and I told them because they're kind of funny. Funny ways of me expressing my anger. But that wasn't my only journey with anger. When I was in high school, I often lashed out in anger at my parents, and specifically my mom. Seemed like every morning there was something that happened, and I would get angry and angry and angry, and it just kept on going, and my parents punished me and got mad at me because I was angry. And they said, you need to get a hold of this anger in your life. It's not okay. And see, the reason that I got to that point was because I wasn't dealing with the core issue. I wasn't being honest about the depression that was going on in my life. I wanted them to just notice that I wasn't okay. I wanted them to just know, because they loved me and because they were always around me, that I had dark thoughts, that I was dealing with anxiety, that I was being treated poorly at school, that I didn't have a good group of friends. But I didn't tell them any of this. And so I kept on getting angry and angry and angry, and it only made things worse because all my parents saw in me was my anger, and they never saw that I was hurting. And so it wasn't until I was honest about the hurt that the anger actually went away. I had to tell them, and it was a long conversation over many tears, all the things that had been going on in my life. And you know, the amazing thing is, because they're not only my parents, but because they're a part of God's church, his community, his people, they completely understood where I was coming from, and they were able to offer me healing. This is the safest place to be honest, and when we are honest, that is our first key towards healing. And the next two things are simple. Pay attention to the warning signs. So this week, if you feel angry, you feel that coming on, don't focus on the anger. Don't try to push it away. Ask yourself, what is this anger trying to show me right now? What's the issue? What's the problem that needs to be fixed? And then pray about it. And try to go and deal with that issue. Look for the core problem.